Okay, back to the state of Minnesota. So up to this point, we have started with a plane. We laid out the general shape of Minnesota. We extruded it up, and we also gave it some difference in the height of various parts of the state. So next thing that we're going to do is the mighty Mississippi. So I'm going to hide my reference. Actually, yeah, I'll hide my reference image. I did put the state on its own layer. The next thing I'm going to do is I need to bring in a reference of the Mississippi so I know what its shape is. And for those of you in the class, not on the internet, I did copy this to your desktop. It should be in the same place as the other reference image from earlier. So I'm going to go to my top view, and just like I did before, click on the image plane button in the viewport menu right here, and click on Minnesota Mississippi reference. Okay, click open. And now what I need to do is position this reference image, because it's not the same size as my other reference image. I need to position this reference image so that it lines up with the state. So I'm going to bring up my scale tool, scale it up about to there, move it over. Looks like it needs to scale down just a touch. Scale it down a little bit more. Okay, and then it looks like it needs to rotate up a little bit, so I will move it there. And maybe I'll scale it back up just a touch. Okay, that is good enough. Now I will set my alpha gain here to, I don't know, 0.4 seems fine. And then I will give it its own layer. I will call this river ref for reference. Hit save and make it a reference layer. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide Minnesota, my Minnesota model, and I'm just going to focus on my reference layer and laying out the Mississippi. And the way, just so you know, the process going in is we're going to start with a plane, and we're just going to extrude one edge along the path of the Mississippi. And then once we have the whole Mississippi kind of laid out, we will extrude it up and give it a little bit of thickness. So let's start with a plane. And the default plane, I'm going to set it to one subdivision each way. So it's just a single quad. All right. I'm going to name it. We'll name it Mississippi River. And then I'm going to position it at the start of the river. So move it over. I'll scale it down to, let's say, I don't know, make it a little bit larger than my demo river. Something like that should be fine. So scale's about 0.25. And then I'm going to rotate it just a touch so that the edges of my plane are running parallel and perpendicular to the river. So something like that. Okay. So that's how I'm going to start. And again, I'm not going to define every single twist and turn in the Mississippi. I'm just going to hit the high points. And I will define a little bit more around the Minneapolis-St. Paul area because that's an interesting point, and we're going to have landmarks on both the St. Paul and Minneapolis side, so I want to make sure that's clear. Yeah. Okay. So the actual process of this is going to be fairly repetitive. I'm going to go into edge mode. I'm going to select just the leading edge here. And I'm going to do the shortcut for extruding. So hold down Shift and then just left click and drag on one of the handles for my move tool. I'm going to move it up. I'm going to move it and then I will rotate it so that it's roughly perpendicular with the river at that point. And then go back to my move tool, hold down Shift, and extrude it again. Then I will rotate it again. And I'm just middle clicking and dragging to use the rotate. And then I will extrude again and move it. Whoops. Move it down. I rotate a little bit. Move it over here. Okay, and then I'm gonna just keep doing that. So maybe I'll extrude a bunch at once. And then at the end I will go back and rotate, you know, all of these divisions separately. But it's the same thing over and over again. All right, extrude, rotate, extrude, maybe I'll extrude again and again. Whoops, didn't actually extrude that time. And extrude. I will rotate here. I'm not scaling it because I want the thickness of the river to be consistent. You could certainly make it a little bit skinnier up towards the start of it, and then as it kind of grows, expand it out. And you know, there's no reason why we couldn't do that later too. I'm just going to keep it a consistent thickness for now anyway. So again, extrude, rotate, oops, there we go. Okay, now we're getting into the metro area. So I'm going to be a little bit more deliberate here. Keep wanting to hit R for rotate, and that's not it in Maya.
Where's the button at?
All right, I'll rotate this a little bit. I will extrude it again. Rotate it a little bit. Extrude it again. Whoops, don't scale it. Just rotate. Extrude it again, and then for this last part, I do want to include the river as it goes along the border edge of Minnesota. So I will bring my actual model of the state back up, and then I'm just going to extrude it out and more or less trace the points as I defined them earlier. Okay, and down here, and then I will rotate them back into place. All right, I'll just kind of move them. And then I'm going to go back and just look at each of the kind of cross sections here. And figure out if I've got more than I really need. So like right in here, I don't think I need 2 edge loops. So I'll select one and just Control Delete. And really, well, I'll keep that one. But I want to even this out, so I'm going to rotate it and move it. Maybe I'll rotate this one up a little bit, move it in. Okay, and I'm looking at the edges and the angles of the edges both before and after the one I have selected, and I want to kind of split the difference and keep it even, and that'll help keep an even thickness to my river as I go. Maybe I'll bring this one in. You know, this one obviously needs to rotate. Whoops, not scale. Rotate. Okay. We can rotate this one a little bit. Maybe I'll bring it in. Again, it's a common pattern for 3D modeling is you add some geometry and then you go in and you clean it up and tweak it and then go on and add more detail. But you want to work as low detail as possible, as long as possible, because it's a lot easier to adjust this shape when you've got, 20 edges versus when you've gone down and subdivided and smoothed it and now you've got 60 edges, right? It's getting that broad form laid out before you add any more detail than you need. So this metro area is the part that's going to take a little bit of extra kind of tweaking, and this is where it's going to get even more kind of representational. All right, I'm going to spread this out a little bit. Maybe I'll take these edges and I'll move them over. I'll move that over. And we'll just make the whole thing kind of a little bit larger than it actually is. Maybe I'll move these things over here and spread that out so we get a smoother definition. Let's see, let's move this one over here. This one I will move up here. Maybe rotate that one a little bit more vertical. Alright, this is a little bit more kind of jagged than I'd really like. So maybe I'll move this up a little bit. And this down a little bit and over. Okay, and I know at some point I will be smoothing this out, so I'm going to go ahead and hit 3 on the number pad and just look and see how that smooths out and make sure that it's going to work for me. And I think that will. Okay, I'll go back to 1. Alright, so I've got my river more or less defined. Let me go into my wireframe. Object mode. And I'm going to move this up above the state. Whoa. That was interesting. There we go. Okay. Move that up above the state. I'll hit 5 to go back to solid view. So now what we want to do is we want this river to follow the landscape of the state, but I can't just move the whole thing down because you can see that the state is no longer flat, which means this river cannot be flat really either. So what we need to do is make it conform to the shape of the state. And there is an easy way to do that. And that involves snapping and this last option, which is live surface. So what that does is you make an object a live surface, and then you can have things conform to that surface. So what we need to do is select the state, click this last snapping icon, which is make the selected object live. Okay, and now it says Minnesota ground. Again, this is why naming is important. Minnesota ground is now the live object, and I also cannot select it, okay, because you cannot manipulate a live object, which means at the end of this, if you forget to turn that off and you can't select it, it gets frustrating. Check your live object and make sure that it's not set. So we have Minnesota set as the live object. Now I can select my river, and I'm going to go into, I can't remember if I need to be in, yeah, I need to be in, let's say vertex mode, select all the vertices, and I'm just going to slide it down. You can see it just snaps right to the surface, just like that. Live surface, just clicking that again. And you can see the river is conforming to all of the different weird shapes that I've turned Minnesota into. We've got the river on the surface of the state, but we need to be able to actually see that it's there. And one way that we'll do that is with different materials, right? The river's not going to look the same as the ground, but we also want to give it a little bit of thickness so it stands out. And so the way that I'm going to do that is select the faces. Let's see. I'm going to get rid of the river here, or the state. There we go. So select the faces, and I'm just going to extrude it up ever so slightly. So hold down Shift, left click and drag on the up move arrow, and something just like that.
Well, mine didn't work.
I've got some thickness. I can turn the state back on, and you can kind of see that it's there. But at this point, I'm also going to do add a couple of placeholder materials. And this is something that I do as I model, just because, you know, this is a situation you run into often where you've got things that are together or next to each other and you just can't really tell what's what. So I'll give placeholder materials. So I'll select the state first, assign a new material. It opens up in this window, and I'm just going to do a simple Lambert. All right, I can bring up my Hypershade editor by clicking this icon up here. And I'm just going to select Lambert 2. I'm going to call it ground temporary, and I will make it a kind of lighter greenish color. Something like that works. Okay. And I've run into this bug in Maya 2018. I don't know why. But I assign the material and it doesn't immediately show up. So I have to assign a different material and then go back to what I want. And then it shows up. Again, I don't know why that happens, but it happens. And then I'm going to select my river and right click and assign a new material. Again, I'm just going to choose the basic Lambert, go to my Hypershade editor, and turn that to blue. A nice river color. That works. We'll rename it to River Temp. Return. Oh, and that one changed. Okay. So now I've got my river and the state kind of laid out. And also I want to change this color. It's a little bit too yellow for my liking. So let's just slide that over a little bit more green. Okay. Yeah. That'll do. And then I'm not sure if that updated, so I'm going to do the whole change the material and then change it back thing. There we go. And again, that's just holding the right mouse button and going down to assign existing material. So now I've got my river laid out and I've got my state laid out. I can go back to my channel box and turn off my river reference layer because I don't need that anymore. And I've got my terrain pretty well laid out. I'm not going to do any more rivers. I don't think I'm going to do any highways either. I think from here on it'll be buildings and trees and maybe some clouds and things of that nature. State in my river laid out. The next thing I want to do before I get into any serious modeling with my landmarks is just kind of block them in so that I can get a sense of where things are going to be in general scale. So the first thing that I will do is the state capital. So I will pull up a reference right here. Okay, this is what the capital, the Minnesota State Capitol looks like, more or less. And so that's what I want to kind of mock up here real quick. So I'll keep that open on my other monitor. And I'll just turn all of that off. You can see that my river is not on its own layer, so I'm going to apply it to my state layer. So I'll just select that layer, go to layers, and selected objects and selected, whoops, I got to turn the layer on. Right click, add selected objects, there we go. turn that off. All right, so to mock up the Statehouse, I'm going to add a cube, and I'm just going to scale it to rough dimensions. Okay, something like that. I'm going to go into edge mode, insert a couple of edge loops here. We'll just do evenly spaced. Add 2. I'm going to scale them in close to each other. I'm going to select the bottom faces and delete them because I don't need them. Then I'm going to select these middle faces and extrude them. And I'm just going to, I'll do local translate Z. Nope, I don't want to do local translate Z. Keep that at 0. So what's thickness? No. All right, I'll just scale them out this way. And then I will take this top face and move that up. So I've got a fairly uniform size here. I'll scale those out a little bit further. All right, I'm going to select this top face. I'm going to extrude that in, but I'm just going to scale it down. Into about there. Then I'm going to add a couple more edge loops. So I will go into my edge, insert edge loop tool. I'm going to do equal multiplier, but I'm just going to do one edge loop. And this way it will stay exactly in the center. All right, and then I'm going to delete these inside faces, leaving a hole there. Whoops. Looks like I accidentally deleted. No, I can just delete these faces. I don't need those either. All right. So this is almost my Statehouse. The last thing I want to do is add the dome. And the way that I'm going to do that is with a new object. And I'm going to set this down to 8 subdivisions. We'll move this up, and I'm going to delete the bottom half of this because I don't need it. All right, object mode. I'm going to scale this down, move it down. Let's look at it in quad view. Okay, we can scale that up a little bit, right about there. I'm going to scale it vertically because it is a little bit elongated. Okay, and then I need to combine these objects. So I'm going to select the body of my building, hold down Shift, select the top of my building, mesh, combine. So now they're one object. I'm going to name this. I will name this capital block. All right, I'll go back into face mode. I'm going to select these faces and move them down. Something like that. Now I'm going to select these bottom edges, turn on point snapping, and extrude those edges down so that they're even with the top of my building. Turn off snapping. And then, whoops, I've got the wrong thing selected. There we go. Then I'm going to select these 2 edge loops, hold down Shift, right click, and bridge them. So that's all connected. Last thing I need to do, well, not the last thing, but the next thing is bring those down so it's about the right shape. And then that's probably good enough for just blocking it in. Okay, that is vaguely Statehouse-like. I might, in top view here, come in and I'm just going to bring in these 2 outer faces, so I'll just scale those in. It's a little bit better of a shape. Okay, so I got my object set. Now what I need to do is turn on my Minnesota and position and scale it. So I will bring it up. I'm just going to select the whole object and scale it down evenly. And let's see. It goes, the Statehouse is roughly there. And I'll kind of bring it up. Okay, I'm looking at it here. I maybe need to bring these side vertices in a little bit. It might be a little bit long. Okay, so now I've got my Statehouse positioned, and I guess the scale is pretty good for now. I mean, we'll get a better sense of it when we start adding other objects and see how they relate to each other in scale. Obviously, if we're doing the lighthouse is not nearly as large as the State Building, and that's not nearly as large as Paul Bunyan and Babe, the Blue Ox, but they will still need to be relatively similar in size so that it functions as a infographic. You know, if we look at some of our references, you know, we're calling out things in all sorts of different sizes. It's clarity of information what is the most important thing, not so much absolute accuracy. You know, some of these are to scale, like this is, actually no, this isn't to scale because that van is not the size of a giant factory. So, yeah, it's about clarity of information, not 100% accuracy. So that's really all I'm looking for as far as blocking in buildings. It doesn't have to be a super complicated ordeal. It's just getting them in place, understanding what you need to do, and how they're going to relate to each other.